So, pre-visualization refers to the ability to see in the mind's eye how a final image will come out based simply on the scene in front of you. Ansel Adams maintained that pre-visualization was a crucial skill in his work and really for all photographers. Back in the era before digital, he was often to accurately know ahead of time what his final print would look like because he was taking into account all the vagaries of exposure and development combined with his extensive experience with the craft of the fine print. So for you, learning these black and white conversion techniques, you'll know when you're out shooting the things you will do and can do later in your post-production workflow to make the final image look like what you pre-visualized at the moment of capture. You see, without pre-visualization, photography can sometimes be a largely random event where it lacks conceptual clarity, and you'll sometimes waste a great deal of time by making captures that don't come out the way you'd expect or like because you're not approaching it in a purposeful or inspired way. Now, on the other hand, there's a huge place for spontaneity and serendipity, which basically means good things happen when you just try to make stuff. So you'll need to decide whether you lean toward extensive planning or more toward relying on your gut. In addition, some kinds of photography call for more extensive pre-visualization and planning than other kinds. In one sense, digital technology has made pre-visualization greatly easier. With a digital capture, you can see what you've got right after the exposure, as well as on your LCD screen, even before you make the next exposure or before you make the first exposure. Reviewing a photo on your LCD can be a great way to check the accuracy of your exposure and the basics of your composition. But there are a couple of reasons why pre-visualization in the digital era remains a challenge. Assuming you've set your camera to create raw captures, which is probably the best way to capture the most information for post-production options later, the image you see on your LCD is a JPEG rendition of that raw file. And as such, it gives you only one data point regarding the potentialities available within the complete capture. So it's as if Ansel Adams were pre-visualizing it's as if Ansel Adams were pre-visualizing it's as if Ansel Adams were pre-visualizing his negatives developed only one way, determined by shooting and exposure conditions, instead of considering how his negatives might come out depending on the complex chemical mixtures and variable post-production techniques that he in fact used. There are close to an infinite universe of possible approaches to digital post-processing and black and white conversion. You can take the file representing a photo and process it to a color image in numerous ways, and with tremendous variations in the final black and white conversion as well. From this viewpoint, the ability to pre-visualize digital black and white takes knowledge of the vast array of post-processing techniques that we're covering during the whole arch of this course. And also, it's going to give you the ability to see with subtlety and clarity how the color world translates to monochrome. By the way, pre-visualization is not a be-all and end-all by itself. It's a tool. It's a technique to help you create more powerful images with greater control. But don't get caught in the trap of excluding alternative possibilities when you come to process your imagery, because again, that serendipity is going to happen and you'll go down paths that you hadn't previously imagined that are much better and stronger than where you thought you were going. So follow those paths. Often the most interesting photos come from surprise detours along the way, rather than following the straight and narrow path of your original roadmap.
Yes!
You could say that black and white composition is like composition in color, but only more so. Since color is not present to entertain and beguile and misdirect the eye, formal composition becomes more important. The elements of formal composition are most important to black and white photos, and they include things like framing and the relationship of the image to its frame, patterns and symmetry, use of lines and shape, movement of the eye through the image, considering entry and exit points. So framing. By definition, a photograph appears within a frame, which is to say that the image is bounded and has a boundary. It's important to design your framing to present an interesting view of the world. The way your image is framed should complement rather than compete with the rest of your composition. Essentially, your framing puts the world within a rectangle. You should consider why the particular rectangle you've chosen is interesting, whether your choice of a rectangle is compelling as possible, and how the framing rectangle relates to the elements within your composition. Patterns. Patterns in photographic composition. A visual pattern is a repetition of similar or essentially similar shapes that combine to create a pleasing whole. Patterns are an important part of how we perceive the world and can add to the power of black and white compositions. Patterns are made up of lines and shapes and can occur at many different scales. In black and white, the most important aspect of a pattern is the repetition of a specific variation in contrast. Some of the most interesting black and white compositions that rely on patterns use the pattern boundaries to combine the impact of the pattern and the way the pattern interrelates with the frame. Lines. Black and white photographs are made up almost exclusively of lines and shapes. Lines connect points and enclose areas to create shapes. The edge of a shape is a line, so lines and shapes are related, but for a moment consider the simplicity and occasional complexity of a line itself. A line moves across a composition in one of several ways. It is horizontal, it's vertical, or it's diagonal. Lines themselves can be curved or straight. Curvilinear lines are different from straight lines. Lines are particularly compelling in monochromatic compositions. So when you're shooting for black and white, look to see how the lines in your compositions interrelate and look to see what you can do to strengthen the way those lines express emotion. End credits. So for this video, I want you to be connected to the author as always, Harold Davis. I have used some of my own thoughts and words in this video, but some words, all the good ones really, come directly from, in full or part, his book, Creative Black and White Digital Photography Tips and Techniques, the second edition. Specifically, I use parts from the sections titled Pre-Visualization Techniques, Black and White Composition, Framing, Patterns, and Lines. So go read those sections. They're awesome. Thanks.